had to throw away my phone because no one in the house will open it and will answer it if I'm not there. So I can sit and ring in the damn background. Do the same with my other devices.
Yeah, I haven't had that problem yet, but at some point my landline's going to ring. But you know, things.
We are live and ready to go when you are.
All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Roanoke College Alumni Association NOKELive series. Today is our third live event, and we will continue weekly with live events to feature other webinars, film and book discussions, and socials, and lots of great content. We will do this weekly through the summer. So please visit the Alumni Hub page on our Roanoke College website, which is roanoke.edu/alumni, and you can find links to each of our NOKELive series. I am Sally Logan Walker, and I hold the position of Director of Alumni and Donor Relations here at Roanoke College. It is my pleasure to host today's webinar. Before I introduce our two presenters, I want to cover just a couple of logistical points. Those of you all who are joining us today via our YouTube channel, please use the chat feature on YouTube to present questions to our two presenters. At the conclusion of their discussion and their commentary on our topic today, we will try to cover as many questions as possible. I will be asking the presenters the questions again after they finish their discussion. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on our Alumni Hub and this YouTube channel beginning tomorrow. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today's discussion entitled Politics, Polling, Pandemics, and Protest. Dr. Harry Wilson has been the director of the Institute for Policy and Opinion Research here at Roanoke College since 1991. In this time, he has overseen the evolution and expansion of the Center of Community Research into the Institute for Policy and Opinion Research. He is a professor of political science here at the college. His expertise includes American political behavior and gun control. Harry earned a PhD from Rutgers University and an MA and BA from Penn State University. In addition to writing many questionnaires, press releases, and reports, Dr. Wilson is the author of 3 published works and is a senior political analyst for a local station, WDBJ-7 TV here in Roanoke. Dr. Rodney Whitlock is a Roanoke College graduate of the class of 1987. While working in Congress, Rodney served as former U.S. Representative Charlie Norwood's, Republican from Georgia's, health policy director, and then as health policy advisor and later director to Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, in the Senate. During Rodney's time in the Senate, he served as the lead Republican staffer for Medicaid legislation from 2005 to 2010, and continued to serve Senator Grassley on all health-related issues. During his time in the Senate, Rodney helped staff Republicans in the Senate on such prominent and important legislation as the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005, Tax Relief and Healthcare Act of 2006, and many others. For the last 20 years, Rodney has been an adjunct faculty member at the George Washington University Milken Institute School of Public Health's Department of Health Policy and Management, and the Graduate School of Political Management's Department of Legislative Affairs. Hundreds of students have taken both Harry and Rodney's courses and have gone on to pursue careers in Washington, D.C. and beyond. And so at this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Whitlock and Dr. Wilson for our today's discussion.
Okay, thanks, Sally. I'm going to take the lead on this, and Rod will jump in whenever he feels the spirit moves him. And
Sure thing.
We've done some of these things before, so we're both comfortable with that. I'm going to start off and do some background and add another P to all of this, since I was the one that was doing all the P's in the titles. And an important one that I forgot to put in there is polarization. And I think when we're talking about politics today in the US, we really have to talk about polarization. I'm going to try not to be too professorial, to throw in another P there, and I'm going to try not to be too long-winded about this, but I think it is important to really get some background in this, because everything that we see, everything today is viewed through this partisan lens. And I'm astounded by how everything is viewed through that lens. When we talk about politics, obviously has been seen in partisan terms for a long time, but economics is viewed in partisan terms today. And that doesn't seem to make sense to me, but I've seen it in our polling at Roanoke College. So I know Dr. Ali Cassins has worked on that for years. And we saw after 2012 and 2016 elections, how Republicans and Democrats flipped in terms of their perceptions of the economy. Immediately they flipped. When their side won, the economy got better. And when their side lost, the economy was in the tank. I would suggest that objectively that makes no sense, but that's how it was perceived. And that gives us some idea of how these things are perceived. And obviously everything in society is perceived this way. And as Rod's going to talk about at some point in time in this, if I ever let him get a word in, the coronavirus is viewed in partisan terms as well. And I think there's some obvious reasons why that's the case, but it really is the case. Talk about polarization, and a lot of people talk about polarization as being something very recent, as this is something people say, well, this is a function of Donald Trump's presidency. My argument is Donald Trump is a symptom of this. Donald Trump is not the cause of this. This started long before Trump even thought about running for president. Whenever you think that probably happened, the polarization has started a long time ago. In the 1970s, 1980s, we saw the Republicans move pretty significantly to the right. And there's a debate about whether that was rank and file or whether that was the elite. But clearly at the congressional level, Republicans moved to the right in the 70s and into the 80s and beyond. I would argue a little bit later than that, perhaps, but Democrats have more than made up for the time that they lost early on in the movement that they've made in, I would say, the last decade, but maybe even a little bit longer than that, in the sense that, from my perspective, Democrats have moved as far, if not further, to the left in that period of time than Republicans had moved to the right before that. So, there is the academic debate about whether this is a grassroots polarization, or if this is really just what they call party sorting, and the parties have become better sorted, where Democrats really are now almost all liberals and Republicans are almost all conservatives. Is it just sorting, or is there real polarization? I'm pretty clearly in the polarization camp, and there are big names in the field on both sides of this debate. So, there are people in the polarization camp, and there are people in the it's just really party sorting camp. I'm in the polarization camp, and I think it goes a lot deeper than just members of Congress. I really think it goes to the grassroots, and it's a combo. I'm not saying that Congress hasn't sorted itself very well, because it obviously has, and Rod could probably address this better than me, but at this point, by many measures, the most conservative Democrat is to the left of every Republican, and the most liberal Republican is to the right of the most conservative Democrat is not even anywhere on the scene there. So I mean, and there are several different measures that have spoken to that over, again, the past several decades for that. And I think that makes perfect sense. Part of the reason I think that's the case is that we have sorted ourselves, we've polarized pretty effectively. I don't think we intended to do this, but we've done it incredibly effectively and efficiently in a variety of ways. And one of those ways, I think one of the important ways, and one of the things that I've been talking about for a long time, my research on gun control, when I first started writing about gun control, I said, well, gun control isn't really a partisan issue, it's an urban-rural issue, which it was, and which it still is, except today, urban-rural is now Democrat-Republican. It used to be mostly Democrat versus mostly Republican, but today it's Democrat versus Republican, right? The Democrats today are urban dwellers, well-educated whites minorities, and female. Republicans today are lower education whites, rural, and males. And those are, of course, generalizations, but they're accurate generalizations. That's kind of where we are today. And that's one reason why people see things very differently, is that there's not a lot of, people don't have a lot of friendships. They don't have a lot of overlapping cleavages that we used to talk about. These things reinforce one another because everybody stays in their own silo. Everybody is on social media with people who agree with them, not with people who disagree with them. And we've gotten to a point where several surveys talk about how one party views the other. We talk about negative partisanship. Parties viewed, and this is rank and file members of the party, view each other in very negative terms, that they see each other as evil, they see each other as dangerous to democracy. And this is true of both Republicans and Democrats. This is clearly bipartisan. This is not just one side name calling the other side, it's both sides name calling the other side. And for elected officials, there's virtually no advantage any longer in compromise, because we've sorted ourselves so well, and people talk about gerrymandering and saying, well, this is because of how districts are drawn. I'm not fully in that camp either, because we've sorted ourselves so well. If we just look in Virginia, you can redistrict Virginia any way you want. It's going to look a little bit different, but you're not going to find a competitive district in Northern Virginia because you can't find enough Republicans to throw into the district to make it competitive. And you're not going to find a competitive district in our part of the state because you're not going to find enough Democrats to throw in there. Now, 20 years ago, yeah, 20 years ago you could have. Today, it's like, I don't care who's drawing those lines, they're not competitive because we've sorted ourselves so effectively in that regard. So I don't see this as a function of gerrymandering. I see this as a function of where we live and the values of the people who live there. When we talk about elections, and I will do this quickly, I promise, and turn this over to Rod. When we talk about elections today are really about turning out your base. We talk about, the persuadable middle. That middle is essentially gone. For all intents and purposes, it's gone. People know who they're voting for in November. People knew who they were voting for because before the Democrats had decided who their nominee was going to be. They knew they were voting for Trump or they were voting against Trump. It was really pretty simple. And that's, it's kind of where we are now. In the May Roanoke College poll, I think this is an excellent example, because in all my years of polling here, I've never seen anything like this. We did, the presidential matchup, and we had, Biden over Trump 51-39. You say, well, 12 points, and everybody's under the 12-point margin, and I understand why. The most amazing part about that to me is it's 90%, right? We're still several months in front of the election. That's 90% who were saying, I'm voting for one guy or another. We had another 8% that said they were going to vote for somebody else. We only had, I've never seen this, we've only had 2% who said they were undecided. We have 8% undecided a week before the election. And in this one, 4 months in advance, we have 2% who say they haven't made up their mind, right? That's pretty amazing, and gives you an idea sort of where we are as a country. I don't think any of this is good, by the way, but gives an idea of where we are. With that, I'll turn this over to Rod for some comments from him.
Yeah, so let me make a couple of quick points, and then you and I can segue into the 2020 election. That that if you look at, it's a study after the 2016 election. We have physically gone through the sorting hat here in America, where in the 2016 election, 60% of Americans live in counties that are landslide counties. More than half of us live in a county that was 60-40, which is effectively a landslide if you are winning by 20 points in a county. So we're not just, intellectually separate. I mean, we are physically separating. When you look at the map and you can throw splotches of red and splotches of blue on there, I mean, it's crystal clear. We are, physically separating ourselves into areas where we are more likely to be around people who are going to vote similarly. And I think it's going to be utterly fascinating to see how much that number goes up, in this next cycle, as much as we've seen it rise here. Second thing I'll talk about really quickly is the concept of confirmation bias. So many, 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 many years ago, when both of us were younger and had hair, I took one of your first classes here at Roanoke, just over my shoulder in Miller, where on politics and the media. And if you think back then to that day, before Al Gore invented the internet, before TikTok, the idea that you would be able to self-select your information in a confirmatory manner that allows you to always believe what you believe is right, that seeking out the sources that cause you to believe, well, I must be right because everybody's saying what I think, and that loop would have been impossible in 1987. You would have been considered pretty much a nut if you could go. I mean, that would have been considered fringes on either side, speaking to each other through ham radios. I mean, remember what a ham radio is? That was the internet before the internet. And so that the ability to be able to do that also adds to the polarization that you're speaking of, because it causes people to become more ingrained. And where it plays out, watch it right now with what we're doing with, well, I'll throw in another P, public health, where if you watch the reaction to what we're dealing with in terms of COVID-19, it certainly plays out there. And we're going to watch that into and through the fall and potentially beyond. So I think those are two things to play to your point.
Yeah, your point about the media there, I should have raised that. Your point about the media is excellent. Media have helped us sort in this direction. Again, I would argue they're probably maybe the pioneer in that regard would have been Fox News back in the 1990s. But now everybody is on the left or the right, and I think there are some outlets that actually make Fox look objective by comparison, which 15 years ago I would have said was absurd also, because I would have said, well, no, nobody's going to make Fox look like they're objective. But today, I think there are other media out there that do, because they've gone further, from my perspective, they've gone further to the left and Fox is to the right. And Fox is pretty far to the right. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting that Fox is actually hanging out there in the middle, because they're not. But other media have gone so far to the left. I mean, I check in the morning. I try not to watch too much TV news, honestly, because it makes my head just want to explode. But I do check out foxnews.com and cnn.com in the morning to see what's going on in the two different planets on which I live, because I clearly live in two different planets. It's not one, there are two planets, and they're very distinct, and what's going on is very different.
So we have an election coming up. Hard to keep that in focus with everything else going on. I remember once upon a time before a global pandemic that we thought Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee. I remember those dulcet days, and then everything fell off the rails. If you're looking at what is now the fifth re-elect of an American president since in the last 40 years, Reagan, Bush the first, Clinton, Bush the second, Obama, and now Trump. This will be the sixth version. That 4 of the 5 won. What is the difference? What are the factors that make it such that 4 of the 5 times that we've seen presidents up for re-elect in the last 40 years, they've won?
I think that's a really good question. For me, I think it's probably because people are relatively satisfied with the first term. I think that was clearly the case with Reagan. People were very happy with the Reagan first term. I think that to me is pretty clear. George W. Bush may not have been heading for re-election, but I think he clearly benefited in the long run from 9/11. He clearly did in the short run, but I think in the long run that probably helped him also. And Obama the same way, that Obama in 2016 was able to replicate, or excuse me, in 2012 was able to replicate what he did in 2008, which I didn't think he'd be able to do, and I was wrong, because he did it in terms of turning out, not just getting the support of specific groups, but getting them to turn out, which I wasn't sure he was going to be able to do in 2012, but he did it. And because he had the advantage of coming into office in 2008 when the economy was a disaster. So things had to look better by 2012 than they did in 2008, which they did.
Right. The outlier is George H.W. Bush. And for those of us old to remember, it was the economy, stupid. And it was a question, a referendum on, are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Right.
So if you look at that as being a factor in determining re-election here, strip the names off the ballot, just your generic. If you look at the current economic and public health situation in America right now, it's hard to argue that the incumbent has a chance without going into the issues of who the incumbent is. I mean, just on structure alone, with depression-ish level unemployment, with public health being a severe concern, I mean, the bar is really high for a comeback, wouldn't you say?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I mean, I think if the conventional wisdom holds, the easy answer is yeah. The answer is he's toast if conventional wisdom holds. But Trump has never been about conventional wisdom. And in addition to that, I'm not sure that people blame him for this. I mean, obviously, he's going to talk about the economy in the campaign. That's the only thing he can talk about. It's the only thing right now where he's got an advantage over Biden, and say, hey, I gave you a great economy, and if you give me a chance, I'll give it to you again. And I think he has that going for him, that people are not going to, and it's difficult. You can blame him for how he handled the COVID-19 situation. From my perspective, you can't blame him for it coming here. You can blame him for what happened after it got here. And in terms of the economy, I would say on that one, he can come out of this well, because he's been arguing from the very beginning, open up, open up, open up. We can't open up soon enough for him, right?
Yeah, so that is sort of the fun of doing something this like right now, which is I always enjoy making predictions, because you're 100% right the time you make it, and hopefully by the time the election occurs, people forget what you said when you made the prediction, and that's what I'm hoping here on June the 16th. I mean, it's easy to make the case that all of the telemetry for this election screams the incumbent has no chance. So what are those things that you could see? I mean, if we're at this level of economic and public health concern in November, if we've had second wave come through, if unemployment is still running what it is, I mean, it would be extraordinary for the incumbent to win. Again, not even discussing the name. But what if we move into the gray area where we're working on some level of economic improvement? Some Americans are going back into the workforce there. People are not collecting unemployment checks because they have actual jobs, and it feels like we are containing more than not with COVID. We haven't had a relapse that caused us to shut down schools. What happens if we're in that gray area? I mean, what do you think are some of the things that could turn an election?
Well, I think it's easy. I think it's easy there to sort of say, well, if things are looking better, then that's going to benefit Trump, and whatever. But if we circle back to my sort of first point with polarization, the Trump people are going to say it wasn't his fault. The economy was strong. China's fault that we have the coronavirus. He did everything he could do. We're going to vote for him. And I would suggest that the people who hate Donald Trump, we passed this like 5 exits ago, right? We're into hatred now. The people who hate Donald Trump, it doesn't matter. I mean, his numbers are so baked in. I mean, I'll turn something back on a question back on you. Can you conceive of a president who went through what's happened in the country that you just outlined for us, economically and in terms of health, and his job approval numbers are the same now as they were 6 months ago?
No, and that speaks to the polarization and how much everything is viewed through the confirmation bias. Well, it's not my guy's fault.
Right, and I say, and I borrow the phrase from him that he that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't matter. And I add to that, he could take a bullet for someone on Fifth Avenue, and for the people who hate him, it wouldn't matter because he didn't take enough bullets or soon enough. And for the people who love him, they just wouldn't care. I mean, they don't care what he does.
So let me
demonstrate
lay out a micro level analysis just to get your react. All right. I'm a big believer in the blue wall, red wall, that if you go back all the way back to Clinton's first election, that America is pretty baked in terms of states. California is going blue. Okay. Still think Alabama's red. All right. Roll Tide. That if you look at states, I will argue that there are only 7 of consequence. The 3 that we would have traditionally considered really important, Florida, Ohio, and add North Carolina to the mix because it's been willing to go either way. Then the 3 Rust Belts that we all went, wait, what? In November of 16, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And then throw in New Hampshire as the one potential state that Trump could flip. Would you agree that if we really are having a serious conversation about any state outside of those, I mean, if Arizona is really in play, it's actually not a close election, it's a wipeout. If Texas is in play, it's a wipeout. If somehow or another Minnesota, I mean, I remember once upon a time that might have been considered in play for Trump. I mean, if we're outside those 7, it's not actually a close election. Would you agree with that generally where I'm going?
I would certainly agree with that. Yeah, and everybody knows. I mean, your point's very well taken about that most states it's baked in, and since we're in Virginia now, you talk about the evolution of Virginia in the 3+ decades that I've been here. Virginia went from being Democratic to being Republican to being purple, and my Republican friends do not like to admit this or don't want to recognize it, but Virginia is no longer purple. No. Virginia is blue, and Virginia is not going back for a while. It's pretty blue, and Virginia is not even going to be. The good news for the people from Virginia is we're not going to have to watch endless TV ads this fall that are going to drive you crazy because they're not spending their money here because we're not competitive. And neither side really thinks we're in play, I don't think. North Carolina, North Carolinians are playing right in Florida, and the Rust Belt states. And I think, and I still go back to in 2016, sort of what happened with Trump and the Rust Belt states. I do believe it's not just that Hillary Clinton didn't go there. It's that the Democratic Party has moved away from the concerns of those working class whites. The Democratic Party has hitched its wagon to the changing demographics of the country, which are undeniable, and has said, demography is destiny, and these other groups are the future, which is, again, I think undeniable. They just thought the future came a little sooner than it might actually be coming. But the future is coming, but it didn't arrive in 2016 as the Democrats hoped it did. And to me, I would look at it as, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan didn't leave the Democrats. The Democrats left those states. Those states were winnable, I think, for the Democrats, and are this time around. I think the Democrats just lost them.
So if we were to think through, okay, what are some of the factors that are in play that, again, you show me 20% unemployment, I'm not feeling like the incumbent has a prayer in those states. But if you're on the rebound, what are some of the things in play? Now I'll lay out a supposition and get your react to it if you don't mind, which is that given the nature of polarization and given that our perspectives have become so subjective, and this one popped out just in the last few days, which just was mind-boggling to me to even say out loud, which is if a vaccine were developed and it were to make it through the pipeline and be on track to be able to be distributed in October, that actually becomes a subjective political event. Do you believe that that's occurring because it just so happens to benefit the president that it's shown that a vaccine's coming out and America's on the way up, or it was rushed through the process and shouldn't be trusted, or actually somebody's done their job and we're going to have something positive happen? I mean, that's how polarized we are, and it could play into that level.
I think I agree with you on that, Rod. I mean, I really think that it could. And because we see everything through this partisan lens, I think people are going to look, I mean, people have looked at the virus that way, so people would look at a potential vaccine that way. And right, I mean, I think, and particularly, I think it would also be important which elected officials or candidates or whoever took which position. If President Trump comes out and says, yeah, I think you should do this, like hydroxychloroquine or whatever else, then, you know, I think that the Democrats are going to say, no, I'm not taking that vaccine. I don't want that vaccine. You know, and Republicans would be lining up saying, yeah, here's my arm. I'll take it. I mean, as crazy as that sounds, but I think that's the way we see these things. And for me, you know, the election, I think elections now really become about the base and turnout. And you got to turn out your base. And that's why we see both parties playing to their base. That's why we see what's going on right now with the protest, that we see the Democrats taking the position of protesters. I said protesters, not looters. Taking the position of protesters, and we've got Donald Trump tweeting every day, law and order, and I don't think he's promoting the reruns of the TV show on WeTV. Not that I would ever watch those reruns, but I don't think he's promoting those.
So 4 of the 7 states we outlined, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, all have Democratic governors. Could you see a world where, again, the partisan response to what is a public health issue here, that each state, each locality has to make decisions on what their comfort level is with schools, that the president could run against, in those critical states, governors who are, watch my use of the word, more conservative on their willingness to allow schools to open, allow people to be fully back in work, with the president screaming, you nanny state folks, you're the problem, as a means to argue this is why I should be reelected.
Well, I think clearly, yeah. I mean, I think clearly he would run against them. I think he would run against them if they were Republicans. He wouldn't have a problem running against Mike DeWine in Ohio because he hasn't opened up efficiently quickly or he shut down too much. So, I mean, Trump doesn't have a problem calling out, I'll use air quotes here, friends. If he actually has friends, he doesn't have a problem calling them out. So, yeah, I mean, certainly he's going to run against anybody. And I think, I mean, he has to stake his, from my perspective, he has got to stake his election on the economy. And I want to open things back up, and things are getting better. And we got some economic news this morning that things are getting better. Spending was way up in May, right? Unemployment was down, still extremely high. But, you know, it looks like we're getting, if not a V-shaped recovery, we're recovering. You know, the speed to be determined, but that's the only thing he has. He certainly can't campaign on, I mean, let's be honest, he can't campaign on being a nice guy. I don't think we're going to vote for him think he's a nice guy. So he just he can't do that. You know, that's not what he's got. I mean, what he's got is the economy. And scaring people about the Democrats.
Right.
And in fairness, the Democrats are scaring people about Trump, but it's not difficult to do.
Not at all. And that's where, you know, trying to strip names off the ballot, lay out what is arguably the political case for just the structure of numbers and what you'd see, but then, okay, now you overlay the Trump effect, and then it is totally quite a game. Can I do one more here before we open up, Sally, if you don't mind? Do you think the Democratic candidate even matters at this point? I heard it's Joe Biden, that he did actually win. I saw some quick blurb on Twitter about he actually has enough delegates to win. Do you think that that there is really a Trump versus Biden, or it's just how much you hate him versus how much you defend him?
You keep interrogating me here, Rod. I thought I was supposed to be the professor and ask questions. I think Donald Trump's biggest adversary for 4 years plus now has been Donald Trump. You know, the guy can't get out of his own way. If he was able to get out of his own way, I would think even with what we have going on right now, he'd be in a very strong position. I would say he could be almost unbeatable if he would get out of his own way, which he is clearly incapable of doing. I mean, can you imagine? Let me throw something on you here. Can you imagine a worse job than being the campaign manager for Donald Trump?
Nope, nope. And there
It's just like you got to wake up every morning thinking like what did he do this morning? Like, you know, it can be like, what did he do this morning? And how do I make this go away?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, you just got to learn to roll with the punches.
Mhm.
Figure he's just him, and this is the way it's going to be. And it worked for him 4 years ago. So who's going to talk him out of being Donald Trump?
No, and it's just, and it is a little challenging to imagine what, what's the challenge Biden has in trying to make in any way be about the things that you can say positively about him from his long and career in public service, that is why he should be elected, versus, okay, it's just, where are you on the orange man? I mean, that's thumbs up, thumbs down. It's hard to see where we'll be in October. It's a Biden issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think Biden wants to make it a referendum on Trump and not on the economy. He wants to make it a referendum on Trump, because if it's a referendum on Trump, Trump loses.
Yeah,
And you're right. It doesn't matter who the Democratic candidate is. If it's a referendum on Trump, Trump loses.
And in that case, just quickly, Biden, the Democrats in that fateful weekend between South Carolina and Super Tuesday, where they all went, okay, not Sanders, that they really did turn the dials to be, okay, this election can only be about Trump. It would have been different had the Democrats not had that sudden, this is what we better do moment, that it now is. I mean, Uncle Joe, we know who he is, so it's not about him.
Right, no, I agree. I mean, I agree with you completely on that. And I mean, I thought they should have arrived at that point. Politically, they should have arrived at that point before they did, because they were flirting with disaster that they didn't need to flirt with. And it depends on, in some cases, would you rather, the old adage, would you rather be right or would you rather be president? Sometimes people would rather be right. And the Democrats, that's the Democrats' danger right now. I think that's their potential pitfall right now, is they need to stay out of their own way also, and let Trump be Trump, and let Trump fight against Trump, and just kind of Biden just kind of like sounds silly to say stand on the sidelines during a campaign, but when your opponent's going to damage him as much as if not more you can, just let him go.
Yeah, what was it?
Difficult to do.
What was it? Terry McAuliffe said, he should just stay in the basement, sort of like I've been for the last 4 months.
So with that, let's turn it over to Sally. We went longer probably we should have. We can do some questions. Try to do some quick answers maybe.
It's gone so quickly, my goodness. Very entertaining. Well, since we're talking about the election, I think I'd like to start with a question from Bob Spillane up in Boston.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
He is very excited to be on this. He's been chatting us up. So he asked you all to please reflect on the real, I use that in quotes, impact/value of the VP pick this year, and generally speaking for past elections. So he wants to know the real impact or value of the VP pick. I'm assuming he's talking about Biden.
I'll go quickly on that. Conventional wisdom is vice president doesn't really help you. Vice president can only hurt you. The VP pick really doesn't matter. I don't think Pence matters for Trump. And I'm not sure how much the female to be named later is going to matter for Biden. I mean, at this point, I think Biden, for me personally, if Rod agrees or disagrees, I think Biden is probably locked into a female of color at this point. Amy Klobuchar is out of this. I thought she was out of it before, because I don't think she's far enough to the left. And Biden probably has to somehow shore up the left of the party, because those are people who are going to get him elected, whether he's really one of them or not. But he's got to get those progressives voting, or he's in trouble. So, I mean, I suspect he's going to come out with my guess would be Kamala Harris. That would be my guess right now. And that they would just pretend all the things she said about him in the debate she didn't really say or she didn't really mean, because it was just politics. And we do this stuff all the time. So what do you think, Rod?
Yeah, I think the challenge of Biden's team is that if it is not Harris, who is a known quantity, having run for the Democratic nomination, having gone through a bit of the process, having seen some vetting there, if they really aren't solid on her, and they look at some of her California background, some of I mean, she's not. Again, I think she's just such an obviously safe-ish choice. If you move to a Florida congresswoman or the mayor of Atlanta, then your vetting becomes much, much more important. And those, I think, are the three that are considered the top tier right now. I think Stacey Abrams, the Stacey Abrams train just never seems to quite have enough momentum. And I think Elizabeth Warren satisfies a wing of the party, but not enough of the party. I agree with you on Klobuchar. Cortez Masto having removed herself from the process. I mean, it seems to me that that's what we're looking at. But one thing I would say that I will just gently suggest is that in the case of Kerry, let's use these two. With Kerry in 2004. If he would have gone with Bob Graham and that had made a difference in Florida, or with, for the purposes of Clinton, Kane versus if she'd have gone with Sherrod Brown in Ohio, I mean, would that have been the difference? I mean, I think that two of the last times the Democrats have lost is, they made decisions on the margins that could have gone either way in states that would have made a difference. I don't think any states Demings is from Florida.
That's a possibility. I mean, that's not. I don't think that's very far out there, and it's a different way of looking at it from strategy. I'm just looking at this point that Biden sort of clearly has boxed himself into a female, and I think given the events of the past several weeks, it probably now looks almost certainly again like a female of color. Yeah. And maybe it was that before, but I think pretty clearly it's that now. And I think Harris is potentially progressive enough to bring those folks in without being so far out there that she's going to turn off some other people. So I agree. I think that she would be, at this point, given where he's at, I think she would be the safe choice. But now, is she going to win the election for him? No. But he's got to pick somebody who's really going to bring those progressives in. If he can get somebody that brings in the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. And again, not worry about, you're not going to convert any Republicans. So you don't really have to worry about, how many Republicans are going to vote for me, because, their wagon is hitched to Trump, whether they want it to be or they don't want it to be, it is. And they're going to look at where the Democrats are right now and be sufficiently scared, with or without a VP pick, that they don't need to be any more scared. The Republicans are going to be sufficiently scared of the Democrats that they're going to, even the ones who don't like Trump are still going to vote for him, because they're more afraid of the Democrats.
No question.
Okay, gentlemen, we're getting lots of commentary on your response, so we'll make sure we share those with you all later. So I'd like to go on to another question from Helen Colosimo. How do you teach critical media consumption in an era without moderating gatekeepers of social media, bubbles, etc., to a generation that has never lived without the internet?
It's hard. It is really hard to try to, and in my job, I talk to a lot of reporters, and that how badly the president has destroyed the media the last 4 years, not in terms of constantly questioning their credibility, but also putting them in the position where they feel like they're on the defensive, and Harry's comment about whether or not it would be if the president either shot someone or took a bullet, I mean, it's going to be viewed that way. And it's just the knee-jerk nature of how much the president has broken the media makes it really hard to chase down the actual something more objective in nature. That's been, and it's trying to find the sources, or at least putting enough balance in whatever you see, so that you always have the opportunity to see an alternative view, not alternative facts, an alternative view that allows you to at least consider, okay, maybe there is more to a story than what, again, and again, when I was talking about that class many years ago, you would never have had that just approach to it that Helen just asked us.
No, I agree. And I have to say hello to Helen. It's great to get these questions from former students of mine. Really happy to have them on board today. I mean, it is so different, and the media has changed so much from when I would have taught that course 30 years ago. You know, and back then I would have been, if I was doing this, which I wouldn't have been doing, but if I was doing this, I would have said, well, you know, I'm a huge New York Times fan. Today, I got to be honest, I'm not quite as big a New York Times fan as I used to be, because the Times is not what it used to be, I would argue. Having said that, as you pointed out, Rod, Donald Trump has done tremendous damage to the media in this country over the course of 4 years plus. You know, the stuff about enemy of the people and that stuff is just is over the top, way over the top. Yeah, but having said that, I think the media have not helped themselves in that regard, because I do think that they've been out to get him. Just because he's paranoid doesn't mean they aren't really out to get him. But you know, as the guy with a bachelor's degree in journalism and who was taught originally, all of my professors, I look at what I read, at what passes for news today, and I think, you know, these people would not have passed my basic reporting course. You know, the first one, Reporting 101, they would have failed. I know that the professors I had, and they would have looked at this stuff and they would have said, this is garbage. You know, you're taking the side here and you can't do that. You know, that's not what, from my perspective, that's not what they're supposed to be doing. There are different views on that, but my view is the old school view. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. So they've done a lot of damage to themselves, and how to get people to look at this critically, it's really tough, because I mean, the only thing I can say is look at media from both sides. Because the media don't take both sides anymore, but look at media from both sides and see if you can try to find something there in the middle to find out where reality is. But it is difficult. It really is difficult.
Okay, I'd like to turn to a question from Matt Sullivan. How will third parties, more specifically the Libertarian Party, factor into this year's general election?
I'll take this one. Matt, you got to send me your email. I'm trying to get in touch and I can't seem to locate you. So you got to send me your email. And of course, Matt's asking the question about the third parties. You know, this time around, I suspect in 2016, Gary Johnson, and I know Matt's probably talking about libertarians here, say an interest that Matt and I share. But in 2016, the Libertarians had Gary Johnson. They had a credible, and I understand I'm using the word libertarian and credible in the same sentence. I understand that. They had a credible candidate, and this time around, it looks like they're not likely to. And, you know, an incredible candidate was able to get some votes. I think they'll get fewer votes this time than they did with Johnson. I think Johnson was probably was their best shot. You know, the Green Party, I think other parties on the left are probably going to largely not do very much, because I think they may come on board with the defeat Donald Trump, and we'll just do what we have to do. So I don't see third parties as being as influential this time as in 2016.
Any line on a ballot that allows for exit from the two majors, it runs the possibility when states can be won or lost by the number of fingers on your hand. I mean, not a gross exaggeration, matters a lot. And God knows all we have to do is go back to 2000 for that.
I mean, that is true. I mean, if you're talking about swing states, it doesn't take a whole lot. So I mean, they could play in that regard, but I don't think the Libertarians will do as well in 2020 as they did in 2016. I don't think it'll be close. I think a lot of the Republicans that voted for Johnson in 2016 will come back home in 2020.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. What is the path to the White House in the future beyond 2020?
That's an interesting. So what is our 24? I'll go way out on a limb here and say that the winner of this election will not be on the ballot in 24. I think I'm not crazy far out that limb here. Biden will be old. Trump, if he wins, he'll be ineligible. So I'm gonna go there. You know, I think it will be about your ability to be able to who is if it's Biden, his vice president is the next at the top of the ticket. It's a near certainty. You know, dare anybody to try to knock that person off. For Republicans, it's a total free-for-all as everybody tries to come in and claim the mantra of claim the philosophical intensity without the batshit crazy that you may have not appreciated for 4 years.
Yeah, I need to weigh in here actually with a question for Rod, because he may have more insight into this than I do. But where do you think the Republican Party is in 2024? What is the Republican Party about after Donald Trump?
I think that's a real challenge for Republicans. In the last 4 years, in the midst of running $4 trillion through the economy like that. I mean, listen, I'm somebody who came to Washington when a $3 trillion debt was obscene. Okay, we're at 25. So, I mean, that's sort of hard to put that genie back in the bottle. I mean, what is conservatism? That's a tough question, in 2024 for Republicans to establish where they are, other than my old 1990 would have been 1996 Pat Buchanan joke, which is the Republican mantra is no, stop, quit it, go away, mine. I mean, don't know that that's works as much.
Okay, I'm going to do one more question for our presenters. Is the division we are seeing now the future of American politics, or do you see any future that is more moderate? And that'll be our last question.
I think, I mean, the pendulum swings back and forth. I've been watching this stuff long enough to go through periods where we said, I thought, excuse me, the Republicans would never take Congress again. And then I went through a period where it's like, well, no, the Democrats aren't going to come back. And it's like, well, the Republican lock on the Electoral College. No, it's a Democratic lock on the Electoral College. This goes back and forth, and this will go back and forth again, which is why, for example, trying to get rid of the Electoral College, you may want to do that today because you're losing, but it could work to your advantage in the not too distant future. So you need to be careful about what you want to do for short-term political gain at the risk of long-term penalty, penalizing yourself. The parties change. Parties change over time. Historically, the parties have changed. I don't know that we're going to see a third party arise and really be successful, but the parties change. What they stand for changes. We've seen, I mean, both parties are very different than what they were when 20 years ago, right? I mean, I remember when, wait a minute, Republicans were the party of the rich, the well-educated. Like, no, those days are over. Those are the Democrats now. And the Democrats are the party of the working class, white, black, brown, whatever. It's like, no, they're not the party of the working class whites anymore. So Republicans can't figure out what they are, but Democrats sort of can't either. But there's always change in the party. So, there is a possibility in time that this will change. In the short run, though, I mean, in the short run, we're locked in where we're locked in. And I don't know what it would take to change, but it may take another important issue that actually somehow, if we find something that cuts across the cleavages that we have right now, I don't know what that would be. But if we find something to cut across that, then maybe you can find a way to do that. But compromise today is really difficult because no one has an incentive to compromise. They have an incentive to beat the other side and bludgeon them as much as they possibly can.
So I think where I'll take it is this. Name me one candidate for anything right now at any level whose election slogan is, I'll roll up my sleeve and I'll go to work, with the other side to try to get things done. I mean, that's been gone for a generation. I mean, it is now, I get elected by saying I'm as far as possible away from those other crazy people, and I will go to Washington and I will punch them in the nose. And listen, I'm old enough to remember when the difference between a moderate Republican and a conservative Republican was the moderate wanted to win an argument with the Democrat. The conservative said, why are you bothering? Just punch them. Where's my bag of nickels? I mean, that was the, it used to be you actually wanted to have debates. Now, because of, again, the confirmation bias loop, all you want to do is show the people who support you that you are as left as you can possibly be, or as right as you can possibly be. And that, I mean, good Lord, Twitter being such a disastrous place to watch that go on every given day. That it's really, I always say, it's about you. And when I use the you in my sentence, no matter where I use it, it's you as a voter. It's you, if you keep rewarding people who are behaving that way with this concept we call re-election, it's your own damn fault. So, I mean, it's really about the electorate saying, I've had enough, but I've also had enough of this entire set of behavior. I mean, show people who actually accomplish things. That's, I think, that where it's going to be, and not just prove that the only right way is what I say.
Wow, that was so informative and entertaining. Thank you so much. I want to thank both our presenters, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Whitlock, for sharing their expertise and their time with us today. And thank you to each of you who are viewing and submitting questions. I'm sorry we did not get to everyone's questions. I will make sure to pass those on to our presenters today, but thank everyone for being on this webinar. We hope you'll join us for each of the upcoming NOKELive events. Our next one is this Thursday, June 18th at 4 p.m. Dr. Wilson will be back with his colleague, Dr. Taylor, and they'll take a more in-depth look into the Roanoke Polling Center, the results, what they're seeing, how you do the polls, especially during the COVID pandemic. And then next Tuesday, we will, on June 24th at noon, we will have a webinar focused on interviewing during COVID. How do you do online interviewing? How you tell your story really shortly? Techniques for resumes. So I hope everyone that would like that input and information will join us on the 24th. And then our last one in June will be on Monday, June 29th at 7 p.m. We have alumni who played hockey when we had our hockey team in the past, and we have some members of our current hockey team. They're all going to review the movie Miracle. It's the anniversary of the 1980 championship of USA hockey, men's hockey team winning the Olympics. And there'll be a wonderful discussion about the movie, as well as the past, the current, and the future of our hockey program here at Roanoke College. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on NOKELive.
Thanks, Sally, for doing this. Rod, thanks for doing this, buddy. It's always fun to hang out with you, even if it's looking at a computer screen.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be home, even if it's only on my screen behind me.